The groom humiliated the bride in front of everyone, not knowing that someone was behind him who would put him in his place. Everything begins like a dream. The perfect morning of the bride, flowers, the whispers of the bridesmaids, the rustle of the dress. But from the very first pages, something feels off. A slight tension hangs in the air, as if someone is holding their breath. Everything looked perfect. So perfect that it felt as if none of it was happening to her. It was as if someone else was slipping into this dress, smiling in the mirror, nodding to the bridesmaid, listening to her mother, who was adjusting her hair for the third time. Noise, light, fuss, the scent of perfume that had lingered in the bedroom since morning. Emily stood by the window, looking at the green lawn in front of the house, where the reception was to take place a few hours later. Everything was like in a movie, a large marquee, white chairs, soft music playing from speakers. Waiters in impeccably pressed suits. She had dreamed of this since childhood. The dream was laid out in a list, in collages, notes on her phone. Everything was accounted for, even the flowers on the tables. Only one thing remained out of her control. An elusive feeling that something was painfully wrong. It hadn't just arisen today. It had lived inside her for the last few weeks, perhaps months. Sometimes, Emily would wake up in the morning next to Jake and could not figure out what exactly was troubling her. He seemed to be there, doing everything right, but inside, something tightened, like the approach of a thunderstorm. She never voiced this even to her friend. Why ruin my mood before the wedding? Everyone gets nervous, she told herself. It's just cold feet. That's normal. But then why didn't her hands tremble with excitement, but rather clench with something entirely different? Outside the door, there was laughter. Her sister was singing off-key, easing the tension. Her mother was discussing something on the phone. Someone knocked on the door, and the coordinator's voice announced that the limousine was waiting. Everything was going according to schedule. The dress, the hairstyle, the veil, the photo session against the staircase, smiles, faces, the camera. But inside, everything felt quieter. So much so that she could hear her heart beating, as if it were beating in some different rhythm. The ceremony was at an old chapel on the outskirts of town. She had chosen this place because her grandparents had married there. Jake initially wanted something trendy, glassy, with an ocean view. But in the end, he conceded, though there was a caveat: the party would be on his terms. Emily nodded then. She often nodded to avoid arguments. When her father led her to the altar, everything inside her froze. Richard, the former police chief, had always been reserved, almost cold, but she felt how tightly he held her arm. This gesture was quieter than words, but heavier. He knew, not everything, but enough. She looked at Jake. He was handsome, fit, with a perfect smile. His parents were sitting in the front row, nodding in approval. Everything was going according to plan. Everyone was happy except for her. The vows were spoken, the kisses done. Applause, rice, photos. Emily tried not to think. She was taught to keep her face, to be a lady, to be dignified. But inside, there was already a trembling beginning. It was still unnoticed, but it didn't disappear. In the marquee, everything sparkled. Guests drank champagne, live music played, the first toasts, tears, hugs. And then it was time for him. Jake stood up. The room became quiet. He raised his glass, looked at Emily, and said, "Today is a special day. I look at this beautiful girl and think, how lucky I am. Not every day do you find someone who is willing to put up with you, especially when you are a laugh." Someone laughed politely, someone genuinely. But Emily felt something inside snap. We all know that Emily has her views on money, but luckily, we're fine with that. Right, dear? The smile was thin, cold, like an icy knife across glass. The guests' laughter became strained. But I always said, behind every successful man stands a woman, with a good lawyer. The laughter ceased. Emily sat still. Her face remained calm, but her eyes did not. There was something deep, heavy in them. And then he entered. Richard, her father, tall, gray-haired, in a dark suit, with a straight back and an absolutely icy expression. He walked slowly, unimpeded. Nobody stopped him. He simply stood next to Jake, looked at him, and didn't say a word, but that was enough. The silence became thick, like in a theater before the final scene. Jake looked away. Someone from the relatives approached, whispered something. He was led out without a scandal, without a scene. Just taken away. Emily sat alone among the flowers, guests, candles. Someone approached. Someone held her hand, but she felt nothing, only herself, her heartbeat, her fear, and a strange relief. On this day, she was supposed to start life with someone, but it seemed she was starting it with herself. It didn't begin on the wedding day or even a week before. Emily could not pinpoint the exact date, but now, looking back, she understood that the signals had always been there. She just didn't want to see them. At first, it was small things. Jake would forget to call when he promised. He would cancel dinner at the last minute because something more important came up. He never truly apologized, just smiled, kissed her on the forehead, saying he had a tough week. Emily told herself it was normal. A successful, busy man had work, projects, calls. She was proud that she didn't throw tantrums, that she could be flexible. Then the corrections began. He advised her not to wear too bright makeup. "It doesn't suit you, does it?" he would say, claiming her dress was too revealing. "Why do you need that?" That her new bag was unnecessary. "You should invest in the common good." He never yelled or was rude, but his voice was cold and confident. He could present criticism as care and devaluation as a joke. And Emily believed again and again. "You're just too sensitive, darling," he would tell her. When she once again canceled a meeting with a friend at his request, he embraced her and said, "This is why I love you. You always know what is important." She smiled then, but inside it was empty. Her mother noticed the changes. First, casually, then more often. And one day, a few weeks before the wedding, she approached Emily, looking straight into her eyes. "Are you really okay with him?" Emily answered too quickly, too confidently. She felt that her response was not only a defense of Jake, but also a defense of herself from the recognition she feared to voice. The recognition that she was scared, that it hurt, that she didn't feel like herself. Up until the wedding, she was saved by the process, organizing, calls, a guest list, decorations, the menu. When she was busy, it was easier. But as soon as she sat alone in her room, that dull feeling came back, as if she were living under glass, seeing the world but unable to feel it. The bridesmaids noticed she had changed, that she joked less, argued less. Someone said, "You've just grown up." Or maybe she's just stopped being herself. Jake always wanted control. He didn't shout, he didn't pound his fist on the table, but he controlled almost imperceptibly in his tone, pauses, gaze. He always knew what to say to make her feel guilty. He could turn her kindness against her, and he turned love into a debt. She never thought about how often she had said, "I'm sorry, it's either my fault, or you're right." It had become as habitual as breathing. As if in new relationships, she constantly needed to prove that she was worthy of being there. Being around him required effort, and she put in the work. Sometimes she would hear from friends, "You're so happy. He spoils you." He really did buy gifts, made gestures, behaved as if he loved her. But each gift felt like a kind of payment. Not for joy, but for silence. For the fact that she didn't ask questions, didn't pry, didn't argue. One day he told her almost offhandedly, "You have an unusual character, but I can manage it. You do want to be better." This phrase etched itself in her memory because at that moment, Emily thought for the first time, "What if I don't want to?" But she quickly dismissed the thought. "It's all good, just a little tense, it will all work out." On the wedding day, she woke up before everyone else. Not from excitement, but from an internal unease that wouldn't let go. Her body didn't want to sleep. Her heart thudded dully, as if warning her. She looked at the dress. It was beautiful, like in the pictures, but now it felt like a costume. As if she were supposed to play someone she wasn't. A wife, a happy bride, a girl who had found her love. Jake sent a short message in the morning. "Get ready to be the most beautiful. Today we are kings." Emily read it and took a long time to respond. Then she just sent a smiley. She didn't know what else to say. Then there was the trip to the chapel, photos, flowers, music. But even then, she felt that everything was becoming not her own. She smiled, posed, thank the guests, but deep down, she understood it felt like a display case under glass. Everything was beautiful, tidy, but without a breath of air. When she entered the marquee and the celebration began, she felt truly ill. She felt nauseous, not from excitement, but from the sensation that she was doing something she didn't want to do, that everything around demanded her to be someone else. And it was at that moment she realized this was not just about Jake, it was about her, about how she had allowed herself to be trapped in a cage decorated with flowers. She had placed the dream above herself, put the picture above the truth. From this realization, everything began. What happened later, the toast, her father's look, Jake's departure, was just a trigger. The main event had occurred earlier, within her. And even then, before the end of the evening, a thought began to materialize inside her. What if this is a chance? Throughout the day, she never felt that everything was genuinely happening, as if she were an actress lost in someone else's play. Smiles, applause, dancing. Everything looked perfect, but inside it was echoing and quiet, like in an empty hall after a performance. The guests had already warmed up with wine, their faces flushed, the music grew louder. Emily sat next to Jake, as a new bride should, with her back perfectly straight and a glass of champagne in hand. In her hand, she caught the gazes upon her, approving, admiring, envious. Someone nodded, "What a pair." Someone whispered, "They are lucky to have each other." But she looked at the table before her, at the napkin, at the ring lying on her ring finger. It seemed to weigh heavier, not as an ornament but as shackles. Then the host announced, and now, a word from the groom. Applause. Everyone turned to Jake. He slowly stood up, took a glass, ran his hand through his hair, made a theatrical pause. He loved attention. It nourished him. He had bathed in it since childhood. The only son of a well-off family, a favorite, an athlete, a star of the faculty. Jake knew how to speak, and he knew precisely when to say it so that it would be remembered. "Today is a day that will change my life," he began. His voice sounded confident, calm, too calm. He slightly tilted his glass. "I look at this girl next to me and think, how strong she is. Not everyone would endure what she has for the last few months." The laughter in the hall was restrained. Someone smirked genuinely, not realizing where it was all heading. "Emily is an amazing person. She knows how to be patient, even when I forgot our meetings, even when I was, well, a bit sharp. Right, dear?" He looked at her. She didn't respond, just stared at him, unblinking. She knows how to listen, even when she doesn't understand, especially when it comes to money. He paused. "Well, you know, she has her peculiar approach to finances, but it can be worked on. The main thing is patience. And a lawyer," he added, smirking. The laughter stopped. One, two voices, and silence. Emily sat calmly on the surface, but inside, everything was already breaking. Something heavy and sharp caught in her throat. She felt the gazes. Someone had already understood. Someone pretended not to notice. And Jake continued, "But, you know, I always said, behind every man, there must be a woman who knows her place. And I found such. Thank you for being here, Emily." He lifted his glass. A few people applauded. The others fell silent. The air grew thick as guests' eyes darted around. Someone looked at Emily, someone at Jake, someone at the floor. And then the hall seemed to freeze. First, she saw him through Richard's eyes, then felt it on her back as the space changed. The air became colder. Her father walked slowly but surely. His gait was the same as when he left for duty. Quiet, measured, devoid of panic. He did not run. He merely walked. Jake noticed him only when he halted nearby, a step closer than permissible, and didn't say a word. The silence was more eloquent than any scream. Richard looked at Jake calmly, not as a father of the bride, not as the man who had just been humiliated, but as a man who saw someone who had gone too far, someone used to getting away with everything. They stared at each other for perhaps only a few seconds. But in those seconds, there was everything: condemnation, threat, unyieldingness. It was not a gaze. It was a verdict. Jake retreated first, said nothing, lowered his gaze. One of his friends stood up, approached, whispered something. A minute later, He left the marquee. Not one loud word, no scene, just a departure. Silence remained. Emily continued to sit. She didn't cry, didn't move, just stared ahead. The world around stirred. Guests exchanged glances, and someone was already getting up. What happened? Did he really leave? But she didn't hear a single word. Her father approached her, putting a hand on her shoulder. She looked at him and, at that moment, felt for the first time throughout the day that she was not alone. She was not powerless, and she did not have to live in this play. Richard didn't say anything, just nodded and walked away. After that, confusion ensued. Coordinators whispered in disarray. Guests began to stand, as if unsure whether to stay. The music quieted. Someone was leading the children away, someone was offering help, and someone, on the contrary, hid to avoid being drawn in. But Emily still sat and suddenly realized, this is the end, but not a tragedy, not a life's collapse, but a liberation, the end of something false and the beginning of something real. A beginning she hadn't awaited, hadn't asked for, but now it was hers. The hall began to breathe differently, as if until that moment, the air had been held back by something invisible. And only now, after his departure, something had been freed. At first, almost nobody moved. People were afraid to make noise, as if any word could shatter the fragile balance that lingered at the empty place at the table. The bridesmaids exchanged glances. Some guests stood up. Someone walked toward the exit. Some remained out of politeness, others out of fear of looking rude. The coordinator, confused, walked between rows, pretending that everything was still on schedule, though her eyes betrayed panic. The music no longer played, and Emily kept sitting. She felt neither her legs nor her arms. There was silence in her body, as if everything had turned off except for her consciousness. And in that strange, almost sterile peace, she suddenly clearly felt, this is not a collapse. This is the end of a role. Over the past weeks, she had imagined countless times how it would be. Their slow dance to the first song, words of gratitude to the parents, hugging friends. In this imagined film, everything was right, smooth, logical, but it lacked her real self, the one who was now sitting among strewn petals, her makeup starting to fade, with a ring on her finger that seemed already foreign. Someone eventually dared to approach. Linda, her close friend from college, sat down next to her, placed a hand on her knees. Hey, if you want, we can just leave right now. You don't have to be here. Emily shook her head. Leaving now seemed wrong. She didn't want to run away. For the first time in a long while, she didn't want to hide from what was happening. Everything that had happened was hers. Even the pain, even the shame, even this hall in which an illusion had just trembled. This was her path, and she had to walk it to the end. Her mother came up a little later, silently hugging her tightly, genuinely. Without words, as warm as hands could be. This embrace returned the sensation of weight to her body. Tears still didn't fall, only the tension, like before a storm, not a destructive one, but an internal one. She slowly rose from her chair. The ring, still on her finger, seemed absurd. She looked at it with confusion, as if it were an object someone had tossed into her life. It did not belong to her. She removed it, neither throwing it nor tossing it aside, simply placing it carefully on the snow-white napkin, as a symbol of what had been and what would no longer be. She walked through the hall. Guests parted. Some spoke words of support, others just nodded. Some looked at her as if she were someone to be pitied. But she didn't want pity, she wanted understanding. Her father stood at the entrance, still in silence. He was like a pillar, stern, unyielding. Richard had never been sentimental, but now, when she approached, he said only one thing. I'm proud of you. These were not just words. In them was restrained pain, respect, and, most importantly, recognition of her strength. Not feminine, nor daughterly, nor anything special. Just the strength to be herself at a moment when it would be easier to break down. The evening stretched on. Guests began to disperse. Friends cleared the tables. and waiters silently gathered the dishes. No one looked her in the eye for too long. Everyone felt this was more than just a canceled wedding. It was a border. Someone else's life was interrupted right at the beginning. Returning home, she removed the dress herself. It took a long time to undo the buttons on her back. It was too tight, as if it held remnants of illusions. When she finally slipped it off her shoulders, she took a deep breath. The air felt alive. She sat at the mirror, without makeup, without a veil. Just her, Emily, without labels, without roles, looking at her reflection for a long time. Her face was tired but real, without a mask, without pretense. The phone was buzzing with messages, calls, photos, confused questions. Jake had written neither apologies nor justifications, but she didn't expect any. And in this silence was even more truth than in his toast. Lying in bed, for the first time in a long time, she felt peace. Not joy, not relief, but peace. As if all the storm she had carried within her for months had finally ended. And just before sleep, she whispered to herself, "I didn't fail, I chose myself." A few days passed. At first, they felt like a fog. Every hour brought reminders, calls, forwarded photos, deleted posts, some apologizing voices. Some didn't know what to say and simply wrote, "Hang in there." Some tried to joke, but weddings are different. Emily explained nothing to anyone. She didn't argue, didn't justify herself. That evening, that toast, that look from her father, everything was clear enough. Her silence was not passive. There was a position in it. She spent 3 days at her parents' house. Her mother didn't pry with questions, cooked meals, cleaned the kitchen, whispered to someone on the phone. Every evening her father sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, silently watching the sunset. Sometimes Emily would come out to him, sit next to him, without saying a word. And this silence was warmer than any conversation. Inside her, there was no rage nor desire for revenge, only exhaustion and a strange calm. She didn't feel like a loser. She felt as if she had returned. A week later, she returned to the apartment alone. Jake had picked up his things in advance, quietly, without conflict. He wasn't even in the city. Everything went as their relationship had been structured, without open confrontation, without honest conversation. He disappeared as he was meant to. The apartment felt empty, spacious. Not because he was gone, but because for the first time in a long while, it was possible to breathe in it. Emily started small. She threw away the box with the dinner set he had gifted her as a symbol of their future together. She deleted the shared photos from her phone, took down the inspiration board from the wall, where clippings of wedding dresses and interior ideas hung. The walls became bare but honest. She went out into the city without a plan, just walked. She sat in a cafe she hadn't been to since college, ordered a cinnamon coffee, and sat by the window. At that moment, she felt that everything around was alive. People were going somewhere, laughing, arguing, working, hugging. The world hadn't collapsed, and there was something liberating in that. The next day she called Linda, suggested they meet. Linda was surprised but pleased. They went to the park, then to the movies, and then chatted on a bench until evening. Emily laughed again, softly, not uncontrollably, but calmly, like someone with nothing weighing on their shoulders. After that, there were other meetings. Some said, "You were very brave," some simply hugged her, and some remained silent but came by. Emily began to notice how the taste for small things returned. The morning coffee, choosing a book, going for walks. She didn't need to find herself. She hadn't disappeared anywhere. She had just stopped silencing herself with other people's expectations. A month passed. She sat in that same cafe, flipping through a notebook, not for plans, not for checklists, but simply writing about how she felt, unfiltered, without fear. And suddenly, she caught herself thinking that she no longer dreamed of someone else's love, but of her life without masks, without games, without the pain that needed to be swallowed with a smile. One day, she went into a fabric store, not planning anything special, and at the checkout, after buying a few rolls for tablecloths, she heard for the first time after the wedding, "Excuse me, what is your name for the receipt?" She paused for a second, then calmly replied, "Just Emily, just, but enough." A little more time passed. She did not seek new love, did not rush in search of new emotions. She was rebuilding herself, not from scratch, but from those pieces that had finally returned to place. She didn't live beautifully, she lived honestly. And in this new breath was everything: strength, silence, dignity. Her story did not become a fairy tale, did not end with a romantic scene, but it became real because sometimes a wedding is not the beginning of love but the beginning of freedom. Yes,